The famous story about how the three wise men brought gold, frankincense and myrrh to the stable appears in the Gospel of Matthew, and traditionally it's said that the Magi were probably astrologers, Zoroastrian priests from Persia who came after consulting their charts. But there is another story, forgotten perhaps to all except the Vatican, known as the Revelation of the Magi, which tells the tale of a sacred bloodline tasked with guarding a bounty of treasures, cave treasures, that they must deliver to the Nativity. And these were the descendants of Adam and Eve's third son, Seth. So before I relate the tale, a little bit of background. It seems to date to around about the end of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd century, and was probably quite a well-known and popular story at the time in the early church. It was translated from English from a Syrian document in 2010 by a professor from the Harvard School of Divinity by the name of Brett Landau. And the Syrian document had in turn been copied down by some anonymous monk in the Zuknin monastery, which is in southeastern Turkey, at the end of the 8th century. And then at some point it had changed hands and ended up in another monastery in the depths of the deserts of Egypt. And it had stayed there until the 18th century, when the Vatican had sent an envoy from Rome and said, bring that back and put it into the Vatican Library, and it had stayed there ever since. So it's told in the first person, as if the Magi are revealing the story themselves. And it tells of the Magi being men from the imaginary land of Shir, S-H-I-R, which seems likely to maybe have been somewhere like China. So in this story, they describe how their families have been given this enormous task to do for generations, and that is to watch for a star and to pray within a cave housed within the mountain of treasures. So these men were kings, from a long lineage of kings, but this is not why they were called Magi. We are told that they have that name precisely because they praise and praise God and pray to God in silence, and this is a devotion that they do on their knees with their hands upraised. And they tell that this is the exact meaning of the word Magi. And they tell of a story that they have for generations has been passed from father to son, and that they in turn will pass it to their sons, that they have like this obligation to look for a star so bright, and it will come to land upon a pillar of light, and then it will they will find it in the cave of treasures. So this is not just any light, but one that would be so bright that it would obscure the sun, moon and stars, so that none of them could be seen in its presence. And within this light, a frail human would be seen with the sign of the cross upon him. And if they were ever to witness this light, then they should go and find this person and take the treasures from the cave of treasures that had been readily prepared for him. So each month they ascended the mountain to praise God and to pray over the treasures. And on the 25th day of each month they would gather at the foot of the hill and bathe in the spring of purification, surrounded by 7 trees: an olive, vine, myrtle, cypress, orange, cedar and juniper. And there were glory in the fragrances of the place. And then on the 1st of the month, they climbed up the mountain and stood before the cave of treasures. And for 2 days, they prayed silently. And then on the 3rd day, they read the revelation that revealed how Adam would often see this star when it appeared in Eden. But his ability to see it was taken away from him when he was cast out of the garden. Grief-stricken about this loss, the revelation tells how Adam had warned Seth how important it was that he walked in righteousness, in the hope that God would be merciful. So together they looked upon the mount of the treasures that Adam had laid within the cave and prayed over them. And then they descended the mountain joyfully to remind everyone of their prophecy, lest one of them might pass away and that their sons needed to be raised up. Well, of course, one day it does come to pass that the Magi eventually witnesses Adam's star. It happens at dawn, as they're being purified in the spring. An ineffable pillar of light, brilliant beyond all comprehension, comes to rest above the water. And the sun tried to rise, but it was just absorbed into the pillar of light. However, none but the Magi could see it. So in awe and wonder they climbed up to the cave of treasures, and lo and behold, there's the pillar of light in front of the cave, and the gates of heaven open, and the Magi see the great powers of heaven carrying a man down to them. And they're told, enter the cave unafraid. And there the light condenses into a small, humble man who greets them. Peace to you, sons of my hidden mysteries. Well, I'll let you read the rest of the story. It's not mine to tell. But what I found fascinating and really frustrating is the word myrrh never appears anywhere in the book. But of course we do know what the treasures were that go to the Nativity. They do find their way to the stable. But the Bible never really discloses what happened to those wealth. So over the centuries there's been lots of theories proposed. Some say that it financed Mary and Joseph for their flight away from Herod. That makes sense. Others say it was entrusted to Judas, who subsequently misappropriated it. I'm not sure I like that one. There's another story that says a thief stole it and was crucified next to Jesus. I like to imagine that it was the same myrrh at Jesus's birth that was used to embalm him at the crucifixion, and that Mary kept it safe for all these years. Well, if you ask the monks at the monastery of St. Paul on the side of Mount Athos, they would say they disagree with all of these theories, because they purport to be the guardians of a gold box of 38 gold coins of varying shapes and decorations, and 62 olive-shaped beads of incense, said to be those precious nativity gifts. And the case was gifted to them in the 15th century by a daughter of the King of Serbia. And this is how they relate the providence. They say that near the end of her life, Mother Mary had gone to the Church of Jerusalem to entrust these gifts and Jesus's burial shroud to their safekeeping, and they had stayed there until the Emperor Arcadius had taken them to Constantinople in the 4th century to protect and promote his city for the appreciation of the faithful. And they had remained in Constantinople for 800 years until the city was sacked by the Crusaders in 1204. The gifts were then taken to Nicaea, which was the temporary capital of Byzantium. But then after the Crusades fell, they were taken back to Constantinople, and they stayed there until it fell to the Turks in 1453. So Constantinople had been this incredible bastion of Christian faith, but now under Ottoman rule, suddenly it became Islamic, and there was a lot of worry about what was going to happen to these different relics. So enter Princess Mara of Serbia, daughter of the pious despot ruler George Brankovic, and Christian wife of Sultan Murat II. So Brankovic had founded a church affiliated to the monastery of St. Paul in the past, and Princess Mara felt that it would be appropriate that the gold, frankincense and myrrh went there. But she was worried about the safety of them, so she decided to travel with them there herself. And according to the traditions of Mount Athos, Mara sailed to the country, and then approaching the monastery from the port, she had an apparition. So women were allowed to enter, they're not allowed still, onto the Mount Athos. It's a place for holy men. And this apparition of the Holy Mary herself, Mother of Mary, appeared before Mara. And so she impeded her journey, and she said, I'm going to bring the monks down to meet you, which she did. And the princess delivered these beautiful gifts and this fantastic box to the monks and the fathers of Mount Athos, so the sanctity of the place was preserved. And the monks placed a cross to show where Theotokos, Mother of God, appeared, and it remains there even today. And so, and that's called the Cross of the Queen, incidentally. And so the gold, frankincense and myrrh live in that monastery, accompanied by a contract that had been signed by the Sultan to detail the agreement that it would stay there, and also with the provenance of how it had got there this time. And so that document still remains there intact in the monastery of St. Paul on Mount Athos. So it's my understanding, and I might not be right about this, that the treasures have only left the monastery twice since that time. Once they were taken to Athens after the 1999 earthquake to raise money for the victims and to strengthen people's faith. And then in 2014 they went to Ukraine and to Belarus. And that was the first time that they'd left Greece in 600 years. But other than that, they rest in silence, still visited, still prayed over and venerated by the monks at Mount Athos. And for now, that's the end of the journey of the myrrh that may perhaps have begun right at the beginning of creation, in that original Genesis garden.
If you enjoyed that, why not join Elizabeth Ashley to explore another strange mystery about myrrh? In the next video she talks about the extraordinary fact that Saint Nicholas is known as the myrrh streaming saint because of a substance that he still leaks today. Click the link to hear the story.